Good afternoon. You're probably wondering why you're watching a music video at a presentation on digital marketing. Well, the answer is simple. Brands can learn an enormous amount from celebrities and supergroups like 30 Seconds to Mars. Lady Gaga has almost 10 million followers on Twitter. 10 million followers. That's 2 million followers more than Barack Obama. As we stand here today, Lady Gaga has more followers on Twitter than any other individual or brand on the planet. In a world that is being radically reshaped by social media, a world in which the consumer is king, brands really have to find ways to convert their consumers into fans. Because in this socially connected mediaverse, a brand's no longer what you say it is. It's what they say it is. So a band like 30 Seconds to Mars has leveraged consumer power in a way that most brands haven't even begun to think about. Let me introduce you to the Echelon, otherwise known as the Mars Army, literally an army of unpaid volunteers who give of their time willingly to promote the 30 Seconds to Mars brand online by putting up posters, by calling into radio stations to request the band's songs, by updating magazines and online publications, by voting for the band in official competitions, by blogging and tweeting and generally keeping the conversation going online. Now these guys don't do that simply because they like the music. They do it because 30 Seconds to Mars has made them a part of the band, quite literally. So in 2009, they gathered fans from across Europe and the United States, about 1,000 people, into a room like this, and they used them to crowdsource the backing track for their latest album. Take a look.
Hey guys, it's so nice to be back. One thing that's always really important at 30 Seconds to Mars is to involve you all in as deep and meaningful a way in the idea of 30 Seconds to Mars as possible. What came to mind was to kind of put an open invitation to the Echelon around the world to come and join us to experiment and to use this collective consciousness as an instrument on the next record. I think you guys are going to help make us the record that we've been dreaming about. So you're giving us a very, very wonderful gift, and thanks for coming. The first thing that we're going to do, we're going to start really, really simple, okay? 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Stomp, stomp, clap. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. The same thing, except I want you to say fight. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Oh, 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 whoa.
So this unprecedented level of consumer participation has really started to elevate 30 Seconds to Mars to the status of a cult. Jared Leto and his band members have obliterated the boundaries that generally separate a band from its audience. They have transformed the monologue into a dialogue. They have begun to devolve the responsibility for building their brand into the hands of their consumers. Now, thanks to Sean Parker and the sea change that was triggered by Napster, the music industry has had to face the realities of a radically empowered consumer base. But as that redistribution of power continues to grow, more and more brands are having to face the same realities. One such brand is Lego, an 80-year-old company who might have gone out of business if they had not been willing to pioneer consumer involvement. So the company started in 1932 making little wooden blocks. They had a pretty radical change in 1949 when they moved to the colored plastic blocks that we all know about. But for almost 50 years, from 1949 to 1998, the company didn't really change at all. They sold billions of blocks and they made themselves a household name, but the product and the company remained relatively unchanged. But then, of course, the market started to shift. Towards the end of the millennium, interactive entertainment changed completely. We had gaming platforms like Nintendo and Sony PlayStation, and of course there was the internet itself. And suddenly, sales dropped by 26%. The company was facing the biggest losses in history. And then they did something radical. They did something they had never really done before, and they did something that most companies still don't do. They started to listen. They literally went online into the Mindstorms user group, they spoke to fans, they listened to fans, and they finally invited those consumers to come to their head office in Denmark to be a part of redesigning their product. They didn't pay for the tickets. They didn't offer people any money. They just said, hey, you love our product. Do you want to be a part of making it more what you want it to be? And these guys said, great. They got on planes, they flew to Denmark, and they helped redesign Lego. They set up a division specifically to focus on the consumer because they realized that the collective knowledge and enthusiasm of their consumer base exceeded their own knowledge of their products. By 2008, sales were up 35% and profitability was at an all-time high. They had begun to engage in what Bob Garfield calls listenomics. And in his book, The Chaos Scenario, a really interesting book, he describes listenomics as the art and science of cultivating relationships with individuals in a connected, increasingly open source environment. He describes the era that we're living in at the moment as the post-advertising age. Why? Because he recognizes that social media has fundamentally redefined the dynamics between consumers and brands. And it's not just academics like Bob Garfield. Procter & Gamble, probably the biggest advertiser in the world, probably the guys who spent more money on outbound advertising in the 20th century than anyone else, have realized that that's not the objective anymore. They don't want to be the biggest shouter anymore. They want to be the biggest listener. And that is a recognition, an acknowledgement of the fact that the dynamic, the relationship between brands and consumers has fundamentally shifted. As Bob Garfield goes on to say, in a socially connected environment, the herd will be heard. Most companies have begun to realize this. I mean, if you go into, most stores, you'll find a suggestion box. You might even find kind of functionality on the website where you can give them feedback. Some of them have even invested in ORM software. But listening is not passive. That's the biggest mistake most companies make. Listening is about, A, actually hearing what's being said, B, interpreting that information, and C, starting to use it to effect change within the business. And as soon as you start to do that, as soon as you start to make listening active, you start to change your paradigm. You start to move from being a command and control business to being one that is focused on collaboration. You start to shift your brand from being closed to being open. And in the socially connected world that we live in, the future will belong to open brands. So what's the difference between a closed brand worldview and an open brand worldview? Well, closed brands view communication as a monologue, while open brands engage consumers in a dialogue. Closed brands are all about awareness. They're all about getting the brand out there, letting people know that the brand is out there. Open brands understand that you have to go deeper. You have to enter into an intimate dialogue. You have to engage with consumers. Closed brands control the message. That was the big term in PR and marketing. You've got to control the message, and they do that through scripted communication. Open brands understand that the only form of true communication is transparent communication. Closed brands are controlled and managed by brand custodians. Open brands are shepherded through the media space by brand stewards. In essence, closed brands are created by marketers, whereas open brands are co-created with consumers. Now, you may say to yourself, well, is it really that easy to move from being a closed brand to being an open brand? And the answer is no, it isn't necessarily that easy, but there are some tools that can help us, and Devolution is one such tool. So this is a strategic methodology that we've designed and used to help marketers adapt to the changing needs of their increasingly empowered consumer base. So we chose the name very carefully because it illustrates an extension of power rather than a disintegration of it, a devolution of power rather than the dissolution of it. So the dictionary definition is a transference of rights or qualities to a successor. And in political terms, if you think about central government, for example, when central government devolves power to local governments, they're not giving away the power. They're extending their power base by broadening their power base. So we really believe that in order to remain relevant in the socially connected environment that we're in, companies have to find ways to devolve. They have to find ways to collaborate with consumers in order to build their brands. The days of being able to hold your brand close to your chest, to be able to control it yourself, are over. You have to allow consumers to touch your brand. You have to allow them to hold and mold your brand. Now, you may say, well, why would I want to do this? This is my brand. I want to control it. I want to control the message. Well, the truth of the matter is, you don't have any choice anymore. So this is a research report that was done by 360i. And according to the report, 77% of all social media content that appeared on Google for brand searches was controlled by a party other than the marketer. In other words, 3/4 of all the brand collateral that's out there, brand collateral about, Coca-Cola or Volkswagen, whoever it may be, didn't come from the marketer. It came from consumers, whether it was through an uploaded video on YouTube or a photograph on Flickr, whether it was a product review or a blog posting. Consumers are molding your brand whether you like it or not. You may as well enter into that conversation with them. The line between producers and consumers has begun to blur, giving way to a new generation of prosumers. People, consumers, who buy your product and in doing so, define it as well. Nokia understood this, and the band The Noisettes did as well. So going back to the music industry, when they got together to produce a brand-sponsored music video, they engaged this new generation of prosumers. Check it out.
So when JWT approached me with the idea, I just thought, gosh, it's quite an innovative, exciting approach to kind of making a very different kind of music video. Give the fans a bunch of cameras essentially in the form of the phones, and they make the video. What do they focus on? What do they see?
It's really cool. Everyone here has a mobile phone, so they're all filming, which apparently has never ever been done before.
And what better people to hold the cameras than our own fans, who are going to be as enthusiastic and up for it.
Just been roaming around, making loads of new friends. It's been really nice. And hopefully some of this footage will go into the video.
I just think it's fantastic. I mean, if you think about it, what you're getting now when you're watching the video is almost like being actually at the gig, being here live. Because what you're seeing is essentially what I'm seeing. So fantastic, really good idea.
What's exciting with the fans is both the crew and the cast. Really it's their video. But what we're going to do, which is actually most exciting, is we're going to throw up at least 140 hours of footage we ended up with. Mammoth amount of stuff online so people can cut it themselves, because that feels like, the most honest way to make this video.
So Jim Stengel from Procter & Gamble says what we really need is a mindset shift from selling and telling, to building relationships. So let's take a look at the way that mindset shift has played out over the last 100 years in a single category. I've chosen cameras because it illustrates the point. So in the 1900s, advertising was very concerned about product features, what it has. So in this ad for Corona cameras, the ad says it's all in the lens. It's all about the product. In the 1920s, there was kind of a subtle shift to benefits. It was about what the product does. So this next ad, that picture disappeared. Well, that was an ad for a camera that, a Zeiss lens that says it's about magnificent performance. So it wasn't about what the camera had, it was about what the camera does. But all of that advertising was essentially product-centric. So the subtleties, the nuances between the differences were much smaller. The big sea change came about in the 50s, when we started to be less concerned about what the product did or what the product had, and more concerned about how it made you feel. So in this particular example for Minolta, it says the excitement never fades. It doesn't talk about the camera, it talks about how you feel. And that was really the birth of brand advertising. And that went from strength to strength really for the next 50 years. But recently, we've become less concerned with the way it makes you feel and more concerned with what it says about who you are. We've become more concerned with identity. And this has really been a shift from brand advertising or brand-centric advertising to consumer-centric advertising, to what I call social branding. And a great example of that in the camera category is this Canon EOS
a leading
campaign.
brand of DSLR cameras. We began with a simple insight that great photography is not about technology, it's about inspiration. And so we created a new way for people to be inspired that would literally spread from one photographer to the next as a new creative experience that was inextricably linked with the brand. Introducing EOS photo chains. The idea is simple. A person takes a photo and selects a detail in it. The detail then acts as the inspiration for a new photographer to shoot. As this process is repeated, it creates a chain of connected photos and photographers. To launch the idea, we started a photo chain, which we showcased in national advertising.
Pink! Box.
Mustache.
This directed people to the photo chain's website, where they could upload photos to continue the chain we had started. Once online, people could also start their own photo chains or join those created by others. As the idea grew, we featured real photo chains and the photographers who had created them in our national advertising, constantly showcasing the live network of photo chains as a new way to engage with creative photography inspired by the brand. As the idea passed from person to person, Photo Chains was now growing as its own social media platform, changing photography from something people traditionally create on their own into a new way to inspire and interact with others. As the Photo Chains network grew, the website became a personalised creative platform for each user, designed to track each person's photos and photographers they wanted to watch, connecting them to creative tutorials from pros and creative products. All designed for people to inspire each other's creativity and create new conversation and PR around the brand.
So, becoming consumer-centric or moving towards consumer centricity is easier in theory than it is in practice. The concept of putting your consumer at the center of your brand is simple, but there are often quite serious and complex ramifications. And that's where something like Devolution comes in. This is intended to be a gentle, step-by-step approach to shifting from a brand out to a consumer-in way of thinking. So describing Devolution as a methodology is beyond the scope of this conference. But what I wanted to try and do was give you guys a sense of how it works and some tools that you can apply to your own brand. So whenever we apply the Devolution methodology, we start off with an inside-out view of the brands. It's what we like to call psychoanalyzing the brand. It's about trying to understand the company, its objectives, its strategy, the brand positioning, everything about the brand from the inside out. We then try and balance that against an outside-in view. So we try and step out of the brand, we try and look in from a consumer point of view, and we try and understand the way they see the brand. And then we do a gap analysis. We look at the difference between these two things, and from that gap, we derive an insight. That insight forms the basis of a strategy, the strategy forms the basis of a concept, and the concept is used to create a context in which the collaboration and the conversation can take place. So 4 basic steps that you can use to apply to your own brand. The first thing is to say to yourself, how do I see my brand? How do I view my brand? Try and take everything you think about your brand and summarize it into one sentence. Now go out and ask yourself how consumers see your brand. If you've got some data, use it. If you don't have any data, go out and ask a couple of people in the street. How do they view your brand? Consolidate and summarize those views into one sentence, and then define the gap between intention and reality. Find out what that chasm looks like and build a strategy, a devolved strategy to bridge that gap. And what is a devolved strategy? In simple terms, it's a strategy that places your consumer at the center of your brand. Now, Chris Milk, who's arguably the greatest music video director working in the world today, faced exactly this issue when he made the last Johnny Cash music video. He wanted to engage consumers in a collaborative process, so instead of making a normal music video, he just sketched an outline and he allowed consumers to populate it themselves. Take a look.
I was first shown the Johnny Cash project through my mom. She knew I loved Johnny, she knew I loved drawing, so when I checked out the website, I was completely blown away. I got to see people's artwork flashing before my eyes, just different images, but always following this cohesive video storyline.
The whole video was full of hauntingly beautiful imagery and symbolism that worked absolutely perfectly with Johnny's song. The frames were somewhat randomly distributed, and you had a limited choice of tools and textures, so really your main focus was just in what you wanted to say.
It was like this organic thing that was always changing because people would be submitting and submitting, and you could see hundreds of variations of the same video. What better way to pay tribute to the man than to make something for one of his songs?
For all of the frames to be drawn by fans, each individual frame, it's got a very powerful feeling to it.
It's just amazing to see so many Johnny Cash fans collaborate on some of his final work. The artists that contributed, I mean, I've seen everybody from Japan, Venezuela, to the States, you know, to Knoxville, Tennessee.
There ain't no grave can hold my body down. There ain't no grave can hold my body down. When I hear that trumpet sound, I'm gonna rise right out of the ground. Ain't no grave can hold my body down. Well, look way down the river, and what do you think I see? I see a band of angels, and they're coming after me. Ain't no grave can hold my body down. There ain't no grave can hold my body down.
It's an amazing piece of work. Social media has changed the world. In order to remain relevant, we have to let go. We have to open up. We have to devolve the responsibility for building our brands into the people who are most valuable to us, our customers. Thank you.